I'm slightly focused here.
Trying to figure, they want to tell the story about the Angeles forests and how that related to the sustainable timber work and some of the.
Yeah, and
I don't have to go into all the gory details, but some of that might be.
Yeah, some of the details are interesting.
You know, let me just throw one other possibility, see what you think.
Yeah.
This is not the forest, but it's the Jimmy Carter visit to the South Bronx, and having him, and that was last time Marian Andrus, by the way, was here.
Right.
She had died.
She left that party early because she had stomach pains.
She wasn't feeling very well, and another couple of months later, she was gone.
Yeah, pancreatic cancer.
And I only say that, and believe me, I'm agnostic about it, because it was kind of like a coming out party. We really got the borough president and everybody else, and it was. I think it was a moment of real moving to the next phase. If you don't agree, then. But
Sure,
but
I didn't have much to do with it.
Yeah, that
though,
was
so,
not
yeah.
Hooper though. So
I was there.
Hooper was not engaged in this. So take it from the forest, take it from anybody. Your goal. You're the ones.
Go for it.
Yeah, I can set it up.
Set it.
I mean, Ed first told me about the timber properties when I was interviewing for the job. And I thought, wow, 70,000 acres of timber to manage, how exciting. When in reality, it was actually 110,000 acres because it was all interlocked with Andrus family holdings. So I talked about the 45% and the 55%. Surdna was 45%, the family was 55%. And the problem with that property was all concentrated in Redding, California, very concentrated. And the investment committee and Fred Moon were saying, you know, it's all concentrated. We need to diversify that, which is what the endowment was trying to do. And also, the family was sort of breathing down the timber committee's neck to sell it because they wanted to, you know, raise capital for their family and their own interests. So there was a real tension there. And then Ed, on the programmatic side, was kind of caught in the middle with Hooper. And
I'll jump in. Yeah. There was, I would say there was. It wasn't so simple in many ways. There were those who were more tilted toward let's sell it to an environmental company that won't clear cut or so on. And then there were others who said, no, let's just sell this thing, do the best we can, and go. And there were easily 6 months worth of conversations and more than conversations. Ultimately, as I remember, and I could be wrong, the day before a public auction was to be held, one of the least environmentally correct timber owners in America walked into the office and said, and I'm not sure of the number exactly, I'll give you a check for $125 million now if you sell me the property. And the auction was presumed to bring maybe 80 million at its max, and that was the end of the conversation.
yeah, well, he said 100 plus.
Plus.
And that plus cost them another 28 million, so it was like $128 million.
And to just put a sense of quantity on that, I remember being up in the helicopter. We were flying over the forest, and I said to the pilot, well, how far are the Andrus, where are the Andrus holdings? He said, as far as you can see in every direction. And that was when I realized exactly what $128 million translates to in terms of hard natural resources. It was quite a stunning moment for me. Because up to that point, it's been numbers.
But before that, even though it may not have been a perfect person to sell to, it was Red Emerson from Pacific Lumber, I think was the name of the Sierra Pacific. No. Before that happened, the investment committee and Fred Moon and myself and Ed, we worked with the timber managers. They were called Beatty Associates in Redding, California. And we spent a year going out there and getting the entire properties put into a sustained yield plan, which was a law in California that required that if you were going to cut timber, you had to have a 40-year plan. So part of that plan was we trained the manager in California how to do a sustained yield plan. We trained their staff on how to do the proper inventory according to the California regulations. Numerous trips Fred Moon had made. I made a couple trips. And then it culminated in this trip that the three of us, the four of us, Fred Moon, went to Beatty's, and we looked at the inventory. And before it was sold, all the timber property was in this sustained yield plan. And that was sort of the balancing factor to it. And then maybe I'll let you, we had a huge gain, and then I don't know how we got to the point where we came up with the budget.
Well, we had a huge gain. I just wanted to make a point about Beatty, the company that was managing and cutting the forests. To my understanding, they had done a very good job as managers of timber properties go. So by no means was it a case where we were dumping this company. In fact, they had worked for the Andrews family probably for 30,
decades.
40 years.
Yeah.
And they had done a very credible, very good job. In any event, we had this windfall, and we used it by opening up another program area, I believe. No?
We created a special sustainable forestry initiative.
That's what it was.
Yeah, we took the gain and cut it in half.
That's
Right.
what it
And said, Hooper, Camilla, go to it.
So Hooper and Camilla, especially Camilla, started working harder.
Right.
you-
Maybe we can, let me advance the conversation a little bit. One of the things that I knew and know every year deeper is the fact that the team that we were able to assemble here at the foundation was really terrific. It was a remarkable bunch of people, all of whom cared deeply about what they were doing and knew a lot, but all were learners and all wanted to do a lot more. And most of them, all of them, had very good relationships with board members. I was very lucky to have been able to select from a bunch of qualified people some really superb individuals who on their own were successful. It wasn't because I come from Surdna, it was because Hooper in the environmental program would go to a particular meeting, and when he would say something, eyes would turn in his direction. Virtually all of our program staff was like that, and that's one of the greatest benefits that I think we could say about it. We kind of liked each other. We had a good time.
We did. And in the interview process, one of the things Ed used to do is he would have the professional credentials done, but he would have an occasional program assistant, maybe a receptionist, maybe a CFO, interview a program person, and he'd pull us all in his office. I don't know if you remember this.
Yeah, I do.
And you'd say, so what do you think? What do you think? Ben Dunn, who was a part-time administrator, he would get involved in the conversation because he might have been sitting at the reception desk. Saying, what feedback did you get while the person was sitting in the lobby? and that was important information for Ed making a final decision. And a lot of people did not make the cut. And so I think that's really how, foundation-wide, how we really got intelligence on who would fit and who wouldn't. And I think we really got a very good group of folks that worked well together.
I agree.
Just to throw out a little bit of a hard question, but what were some of the challenges? Were there any sort of roads that you went down that you realized was the wrong direction, and then, that you learned from?
Programmatically speaking, there was one about 10 years in when our effective citizenry program began to, over the previous few years, began to get a little bit ragged. And it was just trying to do too much with too little. And we brought in an outside consultant who was terribly harsh on the program officer, who is not at this table right now and who is very good. So we were able to reformulate the program as we were running, and it turned out really well. It took a year or so to do it, but we did well, and I'm speaking now largely in terms of programs. I think that was the one that was caused the most trepidation for a while, but then pretty much landed on the right side.
Right. Well, I mean, I would mention CCRP,
Right.
which was this original big family program related community revitalization program up in the South Bronx. It was a really unusual program in the sense that when Ed brought this to the board, he said he wanted to hire a consultant to do it. And the board was like, but you have a staff, Ed. And he said, no, I need a specific consultant. That consultant was Anita Miller. And she was given a corner office, and she went to town. She was, not an inexpensive consultant, as I remember, and the budget was approved, and for her, and then the budget for the program. And I thought that was a really big moment for the board to give Ed that much sort of leeway, and they gave it to him. And you might want to talk about maybe how you came up with that whole concept, and maybe the High School for Environmental Studies.
Oh, yes.
There are a couple interesting things that I think.
Mark's much younger and has many more brain cells than I can assure you. But on the CCRP, or the South Bronx program, I mean, if you recall, in the late 80s and the 70s, the Bronx was burning down. Everybody knew it and everybody saw it. We took a piece of the area, involved 6 community development corporations at the beginning, and spent 7 years working to improve with a number of other foundations. It is, to my knowledge, one of the first major collaborations among foundations that I know of. There may have been others, but it was specifically important because we said, you can't buy the seats, and you can't buy the curtains, and you can't buy the paint. If you're going to come in, you come in whole hog, and the program dispenses what is needed. I think we had 6 or 7 funders come in with us. We also made the biggest grant ever in terms of the foundation. It was, I think, $3 million.
That's right.
For this pop of money, and it was a jaw dropper in terms of what the board had done before, and yet the board stuck with it really well. And after we pretty much ended our work, 7.5 years later, we could look at where we were and say a great deal good had happened. The final footnote of this is, I should tell you, you don't know, but I spoke with Anita Miller last week.
Really?
Yes, who was our consultant. Anita is 83 now. She continued consulting for another decade after that, and in the area of community development, and became a national figure in helping communities work to organize themselves and then to make the best out of their resources that they could. Anita was a gift, and she was fabulous, and we could never have begun to do what we did had it not been for Anita.
And on that same topic of national individuals, one of the employees of CCRP was a young man by the name of Xavier Briggs.
Ah, yes, our intern.
Our intern, and he went through this sort of interview process that I described, where everybody kind of got around the office and said, is this guy, yeah, he got the thumbs up. So you know probably better than anyone where he ended up. He went to Harvard, and now he's
He went
in
to
Washington.
MIT. No, now he
Ford.
is now one of the 3 VPs of the Ford Foundation.
Oh, that's right. And now he's at
Just
Ford
appointed a couple of months back,
Right.
with a massive portfolio, and he's an enormously gifted young man. He's not so young anymore, but that said, he was there, doing good stuff. We all threw our shoulders into that one.
Yep.
This High School for Environmental Studies was a joke around the place, but one day I was in the shower, and I got out of the shower, and I
Shower
said,
story.
this was part of our environmental program, and we said, Hooper and I were yakking about different ideas, but one that popped in my head was there was no such thing as an environmental high school, to my knowledge, at that time. So it would have been 1993, somewhere around there, 3, 4. And so I toweled myself down, and I came in the office and talked with Hooper, why don't we have one? And we chatted some more, and ultimately we created, in the far west part of Manhattan at the time, High School for Environmental Studies, which is still there today, still doing good work.
And it was through the public school system.
And it was in the public schools as a city school, not as, of course, charters hadn't begun yet, but not as a private school or anything else. The point was, these kids can do this work as well as anybody else, given the right teachers and the right chances. And it turned out some terrific, terrific kids. I know to some extent I sound like I'm gloating over programs that we all had and that we all did. You tend to remember those more easily than the ones that didn't work out so well. But that said, there's a lot on the ledger that is real and true.
There are always failures. If there aren't failures, you're not doing the job right.
Right.
Without pointing any particular ones out. But, you know, there would be organizations that...
Oh, when Mark went to Atlantic City that time, with down, I was very...
No, there was
always
it shall remain unnamed, but there was one very large land conservation organization that persuaded us that they had figured out how to combine economic development and land conservation and so forth and develop local businesses and on and on and on. And we went down, we had tours of one of their places and so forth. And then Ford funded a forensic analysis of the financials and came out and just said, the emperor has no clothes, this thing is not working. The people who were running it had rose-colored glasses, but there were many, many foundations that got pulled into this thing, and it's gone. Well, the big organization has survived very well, but all the people who were involved are no longer employed there, and this is an example because it seemed wonderful, but it wasn't. So, again, without naming any particular organization.
Right.
And those are the sorts of things where I think it was worth the investment. I think in many ways it was probably worth some of the lessons learned to do it, but it didn't work out.
Yeah, and just one thing on HSES, that's the High School for Environmental Studies. It was an early example how Ed and the board were interested in sort of this cross-programmatic work. It involved teenagers, it involved community revitalization, it involved education, it involved the environment. And it really kind of pulled from all the areas and all the programs. I mean, Hooper was the primary person, but it did involve Ellen, it did involve, you know, the CR, which would have been Debbie Visser, I think, at the time. So it was really kind of a broad program that really was across all the programs. So I'm sure there are a few others you could think of.
Well, maybe we're giving, you know, a sense of the sweep of what ultimately came out of a place in 1989 that no one could possibly have imagined, financially, endowment-wise, program-wise, whatever else it was. I mean, sure, there's a lot of good luck involved, and we had a lot of good luck, but we were, I think, all going in the same direction and trying really hard to do it, and that made a big difference.
And I think, I mean, one of the hidden not hidden, but one of the less recognized outcomes of all of that is that it is still a strong family-run foundation. Yes, there are 3 external board members, but the torch has been passed largely to the 5th generation.
Yeah.
And there are not many foundations, family foundations, other than maybe Rockefeller Brothers, where you see that the boards have managed the families managed to maintain an intact involvement.
Right.
And I think that's that's another one of the great accomplishments.
And let me add to what Hooper's saying. Had I been left to my own devices, that I wouldn't have thought of that as a primary piece of work. Fortunately, Edie and Libby and Larry, particularly 3 of the family members, took this one on and saw the value of educating the next generation and the next generation about what philanthropy could be like and could do. Yeah. And they nudged hard and well, and AFF and AFPP got started, which I know you've talked about earlier. And I think it is unique among family foundations that this kind of training, responsibility giving, finance giving to young people who are putting a lot of money out on the street and doing it smartly. It's more than just a farm team. That's the point I want to make. it is very much an educational process where people are given responsibilities early, and it's not reading books, and it's not looking at manuals. It is younger people getting their feet wet. It's a Henry Jamesian kind of educational process, and you learn by doing. And these young people have learned by doing. And as I look back at folks who weren't born yet, when I got started, I mean, I think it's a remarkable triumph on the part of this foundation to have done that.
Do you have any thoughts for the future, for the next 10 years?
I think we all should take a tenth of the endowment and leave. I mean, that would be a nice goodbye gift. Thoughts for the future? No, the future's in good hands. We know many of the problems and some of the solutions, and the ship's underway, and the wind is in the right sail, and it's going to go. I don't have anything to speculate on further than that. You guys?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree. I think everyone's got the one oar in the water, and they're all pulling the same direction at this point, which is nice.
I went to a conference last week, the annual conference of the Funders Network, which I talked about earlier, because I'm doing some work for them now. And I kept meeting these people who work here. It was like half the conference seemed to be from Surdna. And plus 2 board members, and one that I never met, and so forth. So that was just evidence of what Ed is saying, I think.
Yeah, and I think I said earlier, a great organization is only comprised of its individual participants. And just every board member, even board members that weren't here a long time, were terrific. Every one of them. I mean, from the original ones that you knew, new ones that have been added, the non-family board members, I mean, every one of them have been terrific. And I think the real ingredient is that everybody's working together as a team and no one has their pet project that they want funded. And that overall goal or mission that is set out by the executive director and the president, that's really what they're following. So that's really the difference. And I've said it again, I said it before, they're not compensated. I mean, they don't receive compensation. And many other foundations, the board members do get compensation. Our board members don't. So that's a big difference. They're really committed to the work, quality work. So those are the things that will keep them going forward.
At the end of the interview we did in Minneapolis with Sam and Edie and Libby, Edie and Libby kissed Sam on the cheek simultaneously. So I think
we're not doing that.
We really want.
We're not. Decide.
That's okay. We'll pass.
Nice. I mean, I think. Yeah. Is there anything else you think would be very important for people to remember?
I think it's open set. Yeah, we've covered a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure you got a couple of nuggets.
I do have one more question, but it's 4:06.
It's okay.
Can I ask you one general question, just because I'm sort of interested in this? What I'm just taking a step backward, it's been interesting to hear about how things have taken shape and how different funding categories were formed. And just in general, can you talk a little bit about how these categories were shaped in terms of did you get a lot of grant applications and then sort of get swayed by the climate of what was going on, or did you internally try to figure out what was important? And I mean, just in terms of the general, how did they, because it's really refined right now, and how did it get there? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think you're hitting on a very interesting question. I mean, many people who want grant funds come and say, they never look at this stuff. They have their own guidelines, and they won't look at mine. Mine is easily as good as theirs, or some variant of that. I think by the end of the 3rd or 4th year, we had virtually stopped looking at stuff that came in over the transom. It was impossible to keep current with it. And simultaneously, and unfortunately, We also had the backside of it, which was when annual reports would come in, many times we wouldn't have a chance to go over them and read them for appropriate data and information and so on, lessons. But for the most part, most foundations now don't take stuff over the transom. They assume that their reporting systems will be very clear about what's within their bailiwick and what isn't. And I think in terms of effectiveness and efficiency, that is a big plus. What I do think is a bit of a minus, maybe more than a bit, is that because philanthropy was set up the way it was 100 years ago, as it's my money, I've made it, I'll spend it the way I want, quite autocratic and certainly not democratic, that there is very little pressure or even awareness on part of many funders to work together, to collaborate, to jointly create programs, although in the last 5 to 7 years this has noticeably begun to shift. But even with that, 90% of the foundations of America, do their thing. So that's what philanthropy is about.
Well, you say we didn't take things over the transom. Do you mean outside of program areas? 'Cause
Yeah.
we always reviewed whatever came in within the guidelines.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I said it improperly.
Yeah. That said, I mean, we had as things progressed, we had a clearer and clearer sense of what would fit, and what wouldn't fit in terms of some credible strategy. But at the same time, every so often, there would be something that would catch our attention that was a little bit different, a little bit outside, and we would occasionally take a risk, if you will, on those things. People would ask, we couldn't possibly meet with everybody who wanted to meet with us, but at a certain point, we would get either somebody else from another foundation would say, you really ought to look at these people, or whatever. People would come in here, make their case. At that point, they generally were invited to submit a proposal, and we would look at it. So it was iterative, as I guess the right process, a right word, but always within a sense of where we were going. We were not, I mean, just to put another point of clarity, this foundation did not, and I don't think it still does, is not trying to create new organizations or its own. I mean, the Bronx Initiative was sort of like that, but it was time limited and so forth. In other words, we respect the nonprofit sector that the foundation serves, rather than disrespecting it and saying, well, nobody here knows what you're doing, so we're just going to create something new because it's better. This foundation has not done that.
Right.
And yet it's been known to happen.
Yeah, and I would say during that period of time, sort of through the 90s, the endowment was growing rapidly, and the budgets were growing rapidly, and Ed and Hooper and Debbie Visser, and they were working really hard to sort of put the money out smartly and effectively, but every year the budget was getting bigger and bigger. That's how we ended up with Big Pops and, remember Big Pops?
I remember Big Pops.
And maybe you mentioned what Big Pops are?
That's all
Big
right.
Pops were, the end of the year is coming and you have $5 million left on the tray, and we knew it was coming, and we would then try to be very creative in our use, and we might make 1 or 2 grants out of that money, and we'd call them, okay, it's our Big Pop ending of the year. I don't want to make this sound cavalier. It was not cavalier. But it was fortuitous that we hit the market well. Mark and colleagues made it work even better, so that we didn't have to live through, except once in the early 90s, we didn't have to live through shrinkage, and we didn't have to live through hard times. And it's very easy, no, it's not very easy, but it's easier to run a very good foundation when everything is going north and not going south. And because everything was going north, we had enough given our system to make mistakes and still do really well.
All right.
Thank you.
I think
Thank
you're
you.
off
Good.
the hook, but this was amazing.